The grand rotunda of the Valeri Dominion did not echo, for the walls were composed of a living, semi-permeable membrane that absorbed sound, breath, and the frantic heartbeat of the galaxy's ruling elite. Here, high above the ecumenopolies of Valor Prime, the air was thin, scented with ozone and the metallic tang of recycled fear. It was a place designed for eternal permanence, a structure grown rather than built, symbolizing the unshakable hegemony of the Dominion over the known star systems. Yet on this rotation, the silence was not one of reverence, but of a suffocating dread that pressed against the chest of High Archon Xylthos. He stood at the apex of the central dais, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the holographic projection that dominated the center of the chamber, a projection of a burning frontier. The visual data was fragmented, corrupted by some incomprehensible interference, showing the once-proud armadas of the Dominion reduced to drifting slag and ionized dust. "It is not a war if only one side is dying," Xylthos intoned, his voice a subsonic rumble that vibrated through the floor plates, felt rather than heard by the assembled Council of Six. "The Scourge does not negotiate. It does not pause for supply lines. It simply consumes. We have thrown the pride of the Third Fleet into the maw, and the maw has not even stuttered." Below him, the Council shifted uneasily. They were beings of immense power, representing species that had mastered fusion before humanity had discovered fire, yet they looked small in the dim, amber light of the rotunda. Councillor Vrex, a chitinous entity from the industrial worlds of the core, clicked his mandibles together in a rhythm of agitation. "We have exhausted the kinetic stockpiles," Vrex stated, the translation device at his throat synthesizing a flat, passionless monotone that belied the panic in his movements. "We have deployed the antimatter screens. We have even utilized the forbidden singularity mines. The Scourge adapts. It absorbs the energy. It feeds on our aggression. Every weapon we fire merely adds fuel to its advance. We are calculating total collapse of the inner perimeter within 3 standard cycles." A heavy silence descended, thick enough to choke on. The Dominion had stood for 10,000 cycles, a beacon of order and technological supremacy. They had curated the galaxy, pruning dangerous species, uplifting the useful ones, and discarding the broken. It was this meticulous gardening that had defined their rule, and now the garden was burning and the gardeners were helpless. "There is one potential resource remaining," murmured Councillor Alara, her translucent, aquatic form suspended in a gravitational field tank. Her species, the Hydari, were the historians and archivists of the Dominion, possessed of memories that spanned generations. "Though I hesitate to bring it before this august body given the nature of the asset." Xylthos turned his heavy head toward her, the light refracting through his crystalline cowl. "We are beyond hesitation, Alara. If you have a fleet hidden in a nebula, speak. If you have a weapon from the precursor era, unveil it. Dignity is a luxury of the living. The dead have no use for it." Alara's tank hummed as she adjusted the suspension field, a gesture of discomfort. "Not a weapon, High Archon. A disposal site. Sector 88 Zeta, the Terran exclusion zone." A ripple of derision passed through the chamber. Even Vrex ceased his nervous clicking to emit a sound of scoffing disbelief. "The ape world?" Vrex spat. "You suggest we ask the scavengers for aid? We quarantined their system 400 cycles ago. We stripped their FTL drives, shattered their orbital shipyards, and left them with nothing but the industrial refuse of the Dominion. They are a species living in a garbage heap, Archon. They breathe our exhaust and build hovels from our scrap. They are likely extinct, suffocated by the very trash we dumped upon them." "They are not extinct," Alara corrected softly, her voice bubbling through the liquid medium. "The long-range passive sensors in the Uit cloud have detected anomalies, organized patterns, not the chaotic radiation of a dying civilization, but the rhythmic pulse of something else, something coherent." Xylthos looked back at the hologram of the burning frontier. The Scourge, a biomechanical swarm of unknown origin, was eating stars. It was a wave of silence that deleted systems from the map. Against such an existential threat, the idea of turning to the Terrans, the galaxy's discarded charity case, was absurd. It was insulting. When the Dominion had first encountered humanity, they had found a species volatile, fractured, and dangerously ambitious. Rather than exterminate them, the Dominion had chosen a cruel mercy, containment. They had enforced the Treaty of Sol, a mandate that stripped Earth of its ability to leave its own gravity well. To ensure the humans remained suppressed, the Dominion had designated the Sol system as a dumping ground for hazardous technological waste, unstable isotopes, and broken hull plates from the Great Wars. The logic was sound. Bury the primitives in trash, and they will spend eternity digging themselves out, never looking up at the stars with hunger again. They were given trash, Xylthos said, his voice dripping with ancient arrogance. Broken hyperdrives, leaking reactors, fused circuitry. We gave them the poison of our progress. If they have survived, they are merely rats living in the wreckage. What can a rat do against a wolf? Perhaps, Ilara whispered, the rat has learned to eat the poison. The debate raged for hours, circular and desperate, until a new alarm cut through the rotunda, a high-pitched shriek of the proximity grid. The scourge had bypassed the blockade. A splinter fleet of the enemy was not cycles away, it was hours away. The theoretical became immediate. The arrogance of the Dominion evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard vacuum of necessity. Send the envoy, Xalthos commanded, his shoulders slumping under the weight of 1,000 years of history collapsing. Send Commander Kale to Sector 88 Zeta. Tell him to promise them anything. Technology, resources, lifting of the quarantine. If there is anything alive in that trash heap, tell them the Dominion begs for its help. The journey to Sector 88 Zeta was a descent into the underworld of the galaxy. Commander Kale stood on the bridge of the Gilded Spear, a fast courier vessel designed for diplomatic intercepts. He was a soldier of the old breed, his carapace scarred from the border skirmishes of his youth, his mind disciplined and rigid. He despised this mission. He despised the desperation it represented. To approach the Sol system was to enter a graveyard of dignity. As the Gilded Spear dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the heliosphere, the viewscreen did not show the pristine black of space. It showed a smog of debris. A dense, swirling ring of metal and composite materials choked the system, a man-made nebula of refuse. Millions of tons of shattered hulls, spent fuel rods, and discarded megastructures formed a barrier around the inner planets. It was ugly. It was chaotic. It was exactly what Kale had expected. "Sensors are struggling, Commander," the navigation officer reported, her fingers flying over the haptic interface. "The density of the debris field is creating massive interference. I cannot lock onto Earth. The radiation levels from the dumped reactor cores are off the charts. Nothing biological should be able to survive in that orbit." Kale stared at the swirling clouds of junk. "Hail them on all frequencies. Use the old diplomatic codes. If anyone is listening, let them know we are not here to dump more waste." The communications officer broadcast the signal. It went out into the void, a beam of coherent data cutting through the dust. "Silence." The Gilded Spear drifted closer to the debris field. The sheer scale of the waste was staggering. Kale could see the jagged remains of Dominion dreadnoughts decommissioned centuries ago, their skeletal ribs protruding from the dust like the bones of leviathans. He saw canisters of volatile plasma, leaking glowing green gas into the vacuum. It was a monument to the Dominion's excess, a landfill the size of a solar system. "Commander," the sensor officer said, her voice trembling slightly, "I am detecting a variance in the debris field. Look at the local grid, Sector 4. Kale narrowed his eyes at the display. The debris was not drifting randomly. The massive shards of hull metal, the tumbling asteroids of scrap, they were moving in synchronized orbits. They were shifting, rotating, aligning. It wasn't a cloud, it was a mechanism. "They aren't just living in it," Kale whispered, a sudden chill running through his hemolymph. "They're using it." "Contact," the comms officer shouted, recoiling as a burst of static screamed through the speakers. The static cleared instantly, replaced by a voice. It was not the guttural growl of a warlord or the desperate plea of a scavenger. It was a voice of absolute, terrifying calm. It sounded like the friction of two stones rubbing together deep underwater. "Unidentified vessel," the voice spoke in flawless High Valerian, the language of the court. "You are drifting within the exclusion perimeter. Your shields are flaring. You are making a great deal of noise." Kale stepped forward, puffing out his chest to project authority he did not feel. "This is Commander Kale of the Valari Dominion. We are on a mission of supreme urgency. We request immediate audience with your leadership. We are prepared to offer substantial reparations for the conditions of your containment." There was a pause on the line, a long, heavy pause. "Reparations," the voice repeated, tasting the word. "You threw your broken swords at us, Dominion. You rained down your failed drives and your cracked reactors. You thought you were burying us." "We have little time for history," Kale snapped, his patience fraying. "A threat approaches that consumes all biological life. If you do not assist us, you will die alongside us. Where is your fleet? We scan nothing but trash." "You scan what you expect to see," the voice replied. Look closer, Commander. You call it trash, we call it the chrysalis. The debris field directly in front of the gilded spear began to shift. What Kale had taken for a drifting mountain of slag, a fused agglomeration of 3 distinct battleship hulls and a station ring, began to rotate. The rust flaked away, revealing not gleaming chrome but a surface of matte, light-absorbing black. The jagged edges retracted, folding inward with a fluidity that defied the mechanical stress of the materials. The structure didn't look like a ship built in a shipyard. It looked like a ship that had been forged in the pressure of a collapsing star. It was asymmetrical, jagged, yet possessing a brutal, predatory elegance. It had no visible engines, no glowing exhaust ports, no weapon batteries bristling with cannons. It was a shadow cut into the shape of a knife. "This is the silent vigil," the voice said. "And we do not fight with fire, Commander. We learned long ago that fire only burns the hand that holds it. You gave us your trash, yes, but you also gave us the pieces of your mistakes. We studied why your drives failed. We studied why your reactors leaked. We found the flaws in your perfection." "The scourge is hours away," Kale said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The sheer size of the human vessel dwarfed his own. It was a patchwork monster stitched together from the corpses of Dominion tech, but it radiated a power output that was barely registering on his sensors, not because it was low, but because it was so efficiently contained. "Can you fight?" "We do not fight," the human captain replied. "We resolve, transmit the coordinates of the enemy." The return to the Valeri home system was the fastest journey Kale had ever experienced, yet it felt like a lifetime. The human ship, the Silent Vigil, did not use a hyperdrive. It did not tear a hole in space-time like Dominion vessels. Instead, it seemed to slide between the layers of reality. Kale's sensors couldn't explain it. One moment they were in Sol, the next, the stars blurred not into lines but into a gray fog, and then they were emerging in orbit over Valor Prime. The situation was catastrophic. The sky above the capital world was burning. The scourge had arrived. Great tendrils of biomechanical matter were descending from the upper atmosphere, latching onto the orbital defense platforms and draining them dry. The Dominion fleet was in disarray, their formation broken. Brilliant lances of plasma and antimatter beams streaked through the dark, striking the scourge masses, but the enemy absorbed the energy, glowing brighter with every hit. It was a massacre. The scourge ships were organic, shifting shapes that flowed around impacts, and lashed out with whips of gravity distortion that crushed Dominion hulls like eggshells. On the bridge of the Gilded Spear, Kale watched the slaughter. "They are dying," he said to the comms channel, which remained open to the human vessel. "Captain, if you have weapons, use them. The orbital grid is at 8% integrity." The Silent Vigil drifted into the combat zone. It looked absurdly out of place, a dark, jagged scar against the pyrotechnics of the high-tech war. It did not raise shields. It did not charge weapons. It simply floated into the path of the largest Scourge hive ship, a behemoth the size of a moon. "Captain," Kale screamed, "raise your deflectors, they will tear you apart." "Noise," the voice of Captain Aris Thorne came through, calm as a grave. "The universe is full of noise. You fight loud Dominion. You scream your existence into the void. The Scourge hunts by sound, not audio but the scream of energy, the roar of reactors, the shout of shields." "What are you doing?" Kale watched in horror as the Scourge hive ship turned its attention to the human vessel. 1,000 weapon pores opened on the enemy surface, charging a volley that could crack a planet's crust. "We are whispering," Thorne said. On the hull of the Silent Vigil, panels made of recycled refuse shifted. They didn't open to reveal cannons. They opened to reveal emptiness, deep abyssal vents that seemed to suck in the light around them. The Scourge fired. A torrent of concentrated, coherent energy slammed into the human ship. And vanished. There was no explosion, no flare of shields. The energy simply ceased to exist the moment it touched the black, jagged hull of the Silent Vigil. Kale blinked. "Sensor report, where did the energy go?" It was absorbed, Commander," the tactical officer stammered. "No, not absorbed. Inverted. The human ship is projecting a field of, I don't have a word for it, it's an entropy field, Ray taking the energy and feeding it into a closed loop." The Scourge paused. The hive mind controlling the swarm seemed confused. It had never encountered a target that did not break or bounce its attacks. It fired again, a massive gravity wave. The Silent Vigil shuddered, its composite hull groaning, but it held. Then the human ship replied. It did not fire a beam. It released a pulse. It was invisible to the naked eye, but on the sensor grid it looked like a ripple in a pond. The pulse passed through the Scourge hive ship. For a second, nothing happened. Then the Scourge ship simply turned off. Its biological lights died. Its gravity whips went limp. The massive organic structure began to drift, inert, dead in space. Target neutralized, Thorne's voice came over the channel. Biology requires electrical impulse. Technology requires electron flow. We merely introduced a localized cessation of flow. We introduced silence to their system. You turned them off, Kale stared at the screen. How? You gave us your broken drives, Thorne explained, his tone conversational amidst the carnage. You gave us the paradoxes you couldn't solve, the drives that folded space inward instead of outward, the reactors that consumed energy instead of creating it. You called them trash because they didn't make you faster or stronger. We realized they made us quieter. We weaponized the second law of thermodynamics, Commander. We built a ship that is a heat sink for the universe. The battle turned. It was not a contest of firepower, it was a harvest. The silent vigil moved through the Dominion fleet like a phantom. Wherever it went, the Scourge died, not from explosions, but from sudden, catastrophic system failure. The humans were dampening the fundamental forces that held the enemy ships together. They were the anti-weapon. Within an hour, the orbit of Valor Prime was filled with the drifting husks of the Scourge. The burning sky cooled. The Dominion fleet, battered and humiliated, held its fire, their commanders watching in stunned silence as the scavengers they had mocked saved their empire without firing a single shot. The High Synod was reconvened, but the atmosphere was fundamentally altered. High Archon Xylthos sat on his dais, but he did not loom. He sat with the heaviness of a ruler who realizes his crown is made of paste. The Council of Six was silent. Standing in the center of the chamber, where the hologram of doom had been, stood Captain Aris Thorne. He was a human of average height, wearing a flight suit that looked as cobbled together as his ship. It was patched, reinforced with unknown polymers, and utilitarian. He wore no medals. He carried no weapons. He looked tired. Xylthos cleared his throat, the sound echoing awkwardly in the acoustic dampening of the room. Captain Thorne, the Dominion owes you a debt that cannot be quantified. You have saved Valor Prime. We are prepared to discuss the terms of your reintegration. We will lift the quarantine. We will provide aid to rebuild Earth. Thorne looked around the chamber, his eyes taking in the opulence, the ancient stone, the arrogance that was now tempered by fear. He didn't smile. We don't want your aid, Thorne said softly. Counselor Vrex clicked his mandibles. Do not be foolish, human. You live in a scrapyard. We offer you paradise. We offer you the technology you have tried to mimic. Thorne laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Mimic. Counselor, you still don't understand. We didn't build the silent vigil because we wanted to be like you. We built it because we saw where you were going. He took a step forward. You gave us your trash. You gave us the history of your failures. We spent 400 years sifting through it. We read the data logs in the broken cores. We saw the trajectory of your empire. You build bigger guns, brighter shields, faster engines. You scream louder and louder into the dark, hoping it will scare away the monsters. Thorne tapped the side of his head. But living in the trash, in the silence of the exclusion zone, we learned to listen. We learned that the universe is not an empty room to be filled with your noise. It is a forest, and it is full of predators that listen for the loud. The Scourge, Ilera asked, her voice trembling. The Scourge was running, Thorne said. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. The Scourge is a scavenger species just like us, but they run from the noise. They attacked you because you are loud. You are a beacon. You are ringing a dinner bell. Xylthos stood up, his crystalline cowl rattling. Running from what? Thorne reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, jagged device, a data crystal made from the fused remains of a Dominion sensor buoy. He placed it on the floor. A projection sprang up. It wasn't a map of the galaxy. It was a waveform, a sound visualizer. We call them the Hush, Thorne said. They live in the spaces between galaxies. They hunt. Civilizations that reach a certain energy threshold. The Dominion has just crossed that threshold. Your antimatter production, your warp signatures, they hear you. The Council stared at the waveform. It was a rhythmic, pulsing signal, vast and hungry. We didn't build the silent vigil to fight the Scourge, Thorne continued. We built it to hide. We built it to survive what comes next. Our ships don't emit. Our planets are cloaked in debris that scatters sensor readings. We have become the trash because the trash is the only thing the hunters ignore. Thorn looked at Xylthos with a gaze that held no malice, only a profound, weary pity. You looked down on us because we were covered in dirt. You didn't realize that the dirt was camouflage. What do we do? Xylthos asked, his voice cracking. The grandeur of the Archon was gone, replaced by the terror of a child in the dark. You have two choices, Thorn said. You can keep building your shiny ships and your bright cities and wait for the hush to come and harvest you. Or... He gestured to the open sky above the rotunda. Or you can learn to be quiet. You can learn to value the broken things. We can teach you how to build whisper drives. We can teach you how to weave shields out of entropy instead of energy. But you have to tear this all down. He swept his hand around the magnificent chamber. The lights, the beacons, the pride, it all has to go. You have to become trash. The silence that followed was different from the silence at the beginning of the council. It was not the silence of fear, but the silence of a paradigm shattering. The Dominion, the rulers of the stars, were being told that their only salvation lay in becoming the very thing they had despised. Xylthos looked at the human. He thought of the scourge ships drifting dead in orbit, silenced by a whisper. He thought of the darkness approaching from the intergalactic void. It will take centuries to retrofit our fleet, Xylthos whispered. Our culture, our way of life. Better a live rat than a dead wolf, Thorn said, echoing the Archon's own thoughts from days ago, though he could not have known them. Thorn turned to leave. We will be in the debris belt. If you want to live, come find us, but leave your pride at the border. It makes too much noise. As the human walked out of the rotunda, the High Archon of the Dominion sat back on his throne. He looked at the hologram of the waveform, the hungry darkness waiting in the deep. Slowly, deliberately, Xylthos reached out to the control console on his armrest. Computer, he said. Yes, Archon, the machine replied. Dim the lights, Xylthos ordered. Dim them all, everywhere. The lights of the rotunda flickered and died, plunging the council into shadow. For the first time in 10,000 years, the capital of the galaxy was dark, and in the darkness, for the first time, they began to listen. The transition was not easy. It was an agonizing unraveling of a civilization addicted to its own brilliance. The months following the Day of Silence were filled with chaos across the Dominion. Systems revolted when the Order came to dampen the fusion grids. Admirals committed ritual suicide rather than strip the gleaming armor from their dreadnoughts to replace it with radiation-absorbing composite refuse. The psychological toll of the revelation, that their grandeur was a death sentence, broke the minds of millions. But the work proceeded. Humanity, once the pariahs, became the architects of the new age. Engineers from Earth, pale from generations living in the shadow of the debris rings, traveled to the core worlds. They were strange people to the aliens, soft-spoken, moving with a deliberate lethargy, their eyes always scanning for signal leaks. They didn't bring blueprints for megastructures, they brought equations for cancellation. They taught the Dominion scientists that the most powerful number in the universe was 0. On the shipyard world of Koth, Commander Kale, now Admiral Kale, watched as the gilded spear was dismantled. The gold-leafed hull plating was stripped away, fed into molecular furnaces, and reconstituted into void mat, the ugly, light-eating material the humans used. It hurts to watch, Kale admitted, standing on the gantry next to a human engineer named Sarah. She was small, fragile-looking, but her hands were stained with the permanent grease of reactor fluid. It's just metal, Sarah said, not looking up from her data pad. Metal doesn't care if it shines, it only cares if it holds. It was a symbol, Kale grumbled. The gold represented the light of civilization. The light attracts the moths, Sarah replied. And the bats eat the moths. We're trying to make you invisible, Admiral. Vanity is a tactical error. Kale looked at her. You people, you really lived like this for 4 centuries, in the dark, surrounded by our garbage. Sarah stopped tapping. She looked out at the skeletal remains of the Dominion fleet. We didn't just live in it, we evolved in it. You know, before the quarantine, humans were loud too. We broadcast radio into space. We fought wars over ideology, but when you trapped us, when you threw us in the pit, we had to change. We realized that shouting gets you nowhere when no one is listening, so we started whispering to each other. We built a society based on internal connection rather than external projection. Psionics, neural linking, empathy fields. We stopped trying to conquer the universe and started trying to understand the space we occupied. She pointed to the half-disassembled ship. That ship of yours, it was designed to project force outward. The new design, It folds force inward. It's stronger, Kale. It's infinitely stronger because it doesn't waste anything. Kale grunted, his antennae twitching. The hush, have you seen them? Sarah's face darkened. A shadow passed over her eyes that was deeper than the void mat. Once, a long-range probe from the Uit cloud drifted too far out. It sent back one image before it dissolved. What did it look like? It looked like a star, she whispered. But a star that sucked in light instead of emitting it, a hole in the fabric of things, and it was singing. Kale shivered, singing. A song of unmaking, a frequency that unravels atomic bonds. That's why we use the whisper drives. They match the frequency of the background static. To the hush, we're just empty space. To them, we don't exist. She looked up at him, a fierce intensity in her gaze. We're saving you, Kale, but don't mistake this for kindness. We're saving you because if you keep screaming, you'll wake the whole neighborhood, and we live in the house next door. 3 years later, the test came. The Dominion was a shadow of its former self. The great ecumenopolises were dim, their energy outputs throttled to bare minimums. The trade lanes were silent, ships moving on gravitational drifts and whisper drives, ghost vessels in the night. The galaxy had gone dark. But the hush arrived. They did not come with fleets of ships. They arrived as a distortion in the constellation of Lyra, a tear in the sky. Through the tear poured entities that defied conventional description, massive crystalline structures that resonated with a terrible, discordant music. They were not biological, they were sentient physical laws, predatory equations given form. They swept through the outer rim systems, the places where the retrofit hadn't been fully completed. They consumed the stars of those systems, draining the fusion fire until the suns collapsed into brown dwarfs. They were harvesting the light. The combined fleet, a mixture of Terran scavenger ships and retrofitted Dominion vessels, gathered at the Nebula of Tears. It was a dense gas cloud, perfect for the new doctrine of warfare. Admiral Kale stood on the bridge of the Void Walker, formerly the Gilded Spear. The bridge was dark, lit only by the faint red glow of tactical displays. There was no hum of engines. The crew spoke in hushed tones, their neural uplinks carrying the bulk of the communication. They are entering the nebula, the sensor officer reported via text link. 3 entities, class alpha magnitude. Hold position, Kale ordered, thinking the words. The neural link broadcast his command to the fleet. Do not engage, let them pass. The hush entities drifted into the nebula. They were immense, jagged shards of reality that shimmered with an inner, sickly light. They were scanning, blasting the nebula with high-energy pings, searching for the reflection of shields, the heat of engines. The ping washed over the Void Walker. Kale held his breath. The energy wave hit the void mat hull and vanished. The entropy field absorbed it, broke it down, and fed it into the ship's life support. The entity paused. It hovered just kilometers off the Void Walker's bow. Kale could feel the vibration of its song in his teeth. It was a sound of hunger, of ancient, mindless consumption. It suspects, Sarah's voice came into his mind. She was on the silent vigil, flanking the enemy. It senses mass but no energy, it confuses them. Wait, Kale signaled. The entity turned. It began to charge a weapon, a singularity bore designed to rip the nebula apart to find what was hiding inside. Now, Kale signaled, the whisper. The combined fleet did not fire cannons. They activated the weapon humanity had perfected in the trash heaps. Synchronized perfectly, 10,000 ships inverted their drive fields. Instead of pushing against space-time to move, they pulled. They created a sudden, localized vacuum of energy, a super-cold spot where thermodynamic movement ceased. The effect was instantaneous. The hush entities were beings of pure energy, of vibration. When the silence hit them, it was like throwing a fire elemental into an ocean. The energy they were made of had nowhere to go. It was sucked into the entropy. Fields of the fleet. The entities shrieked, a psychic scream that tore at the minds of every crew member, and then they shattered. They didn't explode, they crystallized. Robbed of their energy, their forms became brittle, inert matter. They crumbled into dust, drifting into the nebula. Target destroyed, the report came. On the bridge, there was no cheering, no applause, just the heavy, relieved exhalation of breath. They had killed gods by refusing to play their game. The aftermath of the War of Silence changed the galaxy forever. The Dominion was gone, replaced by the conquered of the Void. The capital was moved from Valor Prime to a mobile station built deep within the Terran debris field. It was decided that living on planetary surfaces was too exposed, too loud. Civilization moved into the asteroids, into the dark places. Humanity, the trash dwellers, sat at the head of the new table, not as conquerors but as guides. They taught the galaxy the philosophy of the quiet. They taught that strength was not about how much force you could exert, but how much you could endure. Decades passed. Kale, old and near the end of his cycle, traveled to Earth. The quarantine was long gone, but the debris field remained. The humans had kept it. It was their heritage. It was their armor. He landed at a spaceport that looked more like a monastery than a transit hub. The air smelled of rain and rust. He found Aris Thorne sitting in a garden made of repurposed reactor shielding, watching the sun set through the smog of the orbital ring. "We did it," Kale said, sitting beside the human. "The Hush haven't returned in 20 cycles. The galaxy is safe." Thorne nodded slowly. His hair was white now, his face lined with the stress of a lifetime of silence. "Safe is a relative term, Kale. We are hidden, for now." "Why did you do it?" Kale asked. "You could have let us die. You could have let the Scourge or the Hush wipe the Dominion out, and then you would have ruled the ashes." Thorne picked up a handful of soil. It was dark, rich earth mixed with tiny fragments of metal. "Do you know what this is?" "Dirt." "It's compost," Thorne said. "Rotting leaves, dead bugs, broken stone, trash. But out of this trash, flowers grow, trees grow." He looked at Kale. "We didn't save you because we liked you. We saved you because we know that a garden needs diversity to survive. If we were the only ones left, we'd stagnate. We needed your culture, your history, even your arrogance. Composted. Broken down and mixed with ours to make something new." Thorne gestured to the sky, where the faint, dark shapes of the conquered fleet drifted like leaves in a stream. "We gave you trash," Thorne smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "And you built a future." Kale looked up. The stars were there, but they were dimmer now, hidden behind the veil of caution. But they were still there. "There is one thing I never understood," Kale said. "The name of your ship, the fight ship of whispers, it's a strange name." Thorne laughed softly. "It's from an old Earth poem. We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams." He trailed off. "No, that's not the one. It was something my father said. He said that when the world is screaming, the only way to be heard is to whisper, and if you whisper the right words, you can bring down an avalanche." Kale nodded. He understood. The logic of the loud was linear, force meets force. The logic of the quiet was exponential. A small resonance applied at the right moment destroys the bridge. "There is a signal," Thorne said suddenly, his voice dropping. Kale stiffened. "The Hush." "No," Thorne stood up, looking past the horizon, past the sky, into something deeper. "The whisper drives. They pick up everything, even things from outside this universe." He tapped his temple. "We've been listening to the silence for so long, Kale, that we started hearing the echo." "What echo?" "There are others," Thorne said. "Not the Hush, others like us. Civilizations that went dark millions of years ago. They are out there in the voids between the superclusters. They are hiding, and they just sent a message." Kale felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "What did they say?" Thorne looked at the old alien admiral, and his eyes shone with a terrifying wonder. "They said, 'We see your shadow. Welcome to the deep.'" The scope of the revelation left Kale breathless. The galaxy they had fought to save, the terrifying threats of the Scourge and the Hush. It was all just the shallow end of the pool. Humanity hadn't just invented a stealth drive, they had stumbled upon the survival strategy of the cosmos's apex survivors. "So it never ends?" Kale asked. "The hiding, the silence." "It ends when we are strong enough to change the physics," Thorne said. "But until then, we drift, we listen, we survive." He offered his hand to Kale. "Come, Admiral, the others are waiting. We have a lot of trash to sift through. And the deep is very, very large." Kale took the human's hand. He looked at his own reflection in a polished piece of scrap metal. A Valerian, once a creature of light and chrome, now clad in matte black, indistinguishable from the shadows. He didn't look like a conqueror anymore. He looked like a survivor. "Lead the way, Captain," Kale whispered. And together they walked back into the dark, leaving the sunset behind, ready to face the infinite night with nothing but a whisper and a broken piece of steel. In the high orbit of Sol, the silent vigil, now a museum and a temple, continued its eternal watch. Its hull was pitted by micrometeoroids, its systems running on the decay of isotopes that should have been dead millennia ago. Inside its central chamber, the great archive hummed. It contained the history of the Dominion, the history of Earth, and the data on the hush. But in the deepest sublevel of the ship, a new drive was being built. It was not a whisper drive. It was something else. Based on the signal from the deep, the humans and the aliens were collaborating on a project that defied sanity. If the whisper drive was about canceling noise, this new engine was about canceling location. They called it the Ghost Bridge. An apprentice engineer, a young Valerian named Zal, tapped the glass of the containment unit. Inside, a speck of pure void hovered, suspended in a magnetic bottle made of trash tech. "Is it true," Zal asked the human overseer, a descendant of Sarah, "that this will let us leave the universe?" "Not leave," the human corrected. "Sidestep, the hush on this room, the deep civilizations on the hallway. We're trying to build a door to the outside." Zal stared at the void speck. It was terrifying, it was beautiful. "They gave us trash," Zal recited the old adage, looking at the complex machinery built from salvaged junk. "And we built a key," the human finished. The galaxy spun on. The stars burned, lived, and died. But in the spaces between them, in the debris belts and the dust clouds, the conquered of the void thrived. They were the ghosts in the machine, the silence in the cacophony. They were the trash that refused to be thrown away. And they were ready for whatever came from the dark, armed with the most dangerous weapon of all, the patience to listen and the will to endure. The universe was loud, but the future belonged to the quiet.